Everyone should have the ability to generate a working environment or any other environment in their lives that instills this sense of psychological safety. So we touched on that a little bit earlier, but we didn't actually define it. Psychological safety is this idea that you won't be punished or ridiculed or treated negatively for speaking up. And the easiest way to kind of get this across is actually in terms of real life safety. So like physical safety. The easiest way to explain this is if you're on like a construction site, or if you're at like a power plant, if you see something unsafe going on, if it's going against procedure, it looks off, but you fear that reaction of the people in charge if you bring it up, then you are not psychologically safe.
Hey, Entreleaders, happy Wednesday, and welcome to another episode of the Leaders Lab podcast. If you are new to DCTV, Dr. Charity TV, I am your host, Dr. Charity C. Campbell, better known as Dr. C, and I'm a doctor of management, a world-class millennial global leader, an academic professional. I'm also a multi-passionate entrepreneur, which is, listen, now, you all know, if you've been rocking with me for the 2 years that we've been going, you know that entrepreneurship is like a gem to me. It's one of the things that I truly care about, along with leadership. And we have been having lately a lot of entrepreneurs as guests on the show. And for those of you who are completely brand new to the Leaders Lab, here in the Leaders Lab, we talk all things entreleadership. That is entrepreneurship and leadership combined together. And we also talk about communication and balance as a millennial professional. And today's episode is very special because our guest is here to talk about commitment and consistency, managing expectations in advance, and becoming a finisher, all while having type 1 diabetes. Colleen Mitchell is a life coach for women with type 1 diabetes. She's also an epic fantasy novelist. She's also a podcast host. And can you believe that she does all of this while still working full time? I just got tired, okay? I just got exhausted thinking about all these things. But she's had type 1 diabetes for almost 27 years. And she uses her background in life coaching and psychological safety to lead from non-managerial positions. Wow. And Colleen is here. She's sharing her personal success story with managing a bursting at the seams life and type 1 diabetes. Now, many type 1 diabetics feel restricted by the condition, and most do not know another type 1 diabetic in real life. But if you can relate or you have type 1 diabetes, then she is here to let you know that you are not alone and that you can still lead both in your own life and in your business, even with type 1 diabetes. And also, Colleen lives in Missoula, I think it's called Missoula, Montana. She can correct me if I'm wrong, with her husband and her cat that I had the pleasure of meeting prior to the start of the show. And so, Entreleaders, help me give a big warm welcome to our very special guest today. Welcome to the Leaders Lab, Colleen Mitchell.
I think that is the best introduction I've ever gotten. Thank you for having me on the show.
You know, it's actually my pleasure. And for those of you who are just now tuning in, we already started the party like off camera, off record. We already started the party in the beginning with just a lot of laughs and good stuff. And it makes me very excited about today's show that we have. So backstage, off screen, you had mentioned that not many people continue to like work in business or do things or when they have type 1 diabetes or something like that. Give us the background about that. Like, what's the difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2?
So the big difference between type 1 and type 2 is that type 1 is an autoimmune condition where your pancreas doesn't produce any insulin anymore. And so then you are completely dependent on external insulin. So I wear an insulin pump. Plenty of other type 1 diabetics use insulin pens or they're on multiple daily injections. And then type
Wow.
2 is characterized as a metabolic condition. So your pancreas still produces insulin, but your body
Mhm.
has developed so much insulin resistance that it can't properly use the insulin to transfer glucose in the bloodstream to the cells for energy. And so
Wow.
that's the big difference between the two. What
Okay.
most people typically think of when they hear the word diabetes is they think type 2, because 90 to 95% of all diabetes cases are type 2. And so when people
Okay.
have type 1, we tend to kind of get lost in the mix or feel a little bit underrepresented because it's not as prevalent as type 2 is. And
Okay.
then we have
Okay.
to figure out how to manage this chronic condition that's incurable on top of everything else that goes
Mm.
on in our lives.
Yeah. Now, which one is the most severe? Is it type 1 or type 2?
I would say type 1, because if you don't take any insulin, then you'll die in like 5 days, 6 days.
Oh my God.
It
Wow.
just depends on how resilient your body is. But if you go without insulin, it was a walking death sentence before they discovered insulin in 1921.
First of all, I can tell. I mean, y'all hear her spitting out all of this, this data and these statistics. Listen, this is how I know that you're truly passionate about your own experiences and helping others. But why did you choose type 1 diabetes as a subject, besides, you being a type 1 diabetic? But why did you choose it as a subject of concern for your audience? Like, I mean, you could have chosen to talk about anything or to educate them about anything or work with, leaders in any other field. Why type 1 diabetes?
I think mostly because people with type 1 diabetes often feel very alone. Like I said, for the intro that you said, there are plenty of type 1 diabetics who never meet another person with type 1 diabetes in their life, like in person.
Wow.
I think I was actually very blessed because I was diagnosed at age 2. And when I
Mm.
turned 6, my dad started taking me to a diabetes camp. So I grew up with other kids with type 1 diabetes. I
Wow.
thought that was normal. And it wasn't until I
Wow.
started my podcast, which is called This is Type 1, that I started
Mhm.
interviewing guests who told me they had never met another type 1 diabetic in real life, like at all. And
Wow.
growing up, they had never encountered another person with type 1 diabetes. Maybe they saw somebody in passing at the doctor's office, like in the waiting room, but they never developed a relationship with another person with type 1. And so when they go through life like that, they feel very, very alone. And when you feel alone
Yeah.
like that, it's really hard to talk about because other people don't really understand the struggles that you're going through.
Yeah. So you mentioned, well, I mentioned in the beginning, in the introduction, how you have combined like your experience plus your knowledge and experience in psychological safety and apply it to basically what you are doing now. What have been some of the emotions, the emotions that maybe your guests on your podcast have experienced growing up, the ones that you've seen, or the people who, like you said, they feel like they're alone? What's that emotional roller coaster like for them?
Okay, so I have to preface the emotional roller coaster with telling you kind of what happens with diabetes in general. So, people with type 1
Okay.
diabetes, like I said earlier, we have to use externally supplied insulin to control our blood sugars. And typically, diabetes, when you're type 2, is characterized by an A1C level of above 5.7%. And that just means that your average blood glucose is higher than it's supposed to be. What happens with type 1 diabetes is because we take that external insulin, we end up kind of on a blood sugar roller coaster. So we'll have highs and we'll have lows. And if you're watching the video version, I'm just demonstrating that with my hand, where we go up to the peak and then we come down to the valley. And sometimes the peaks can be really high. It could be somewhere around 400 mgdl, which is really, really bad. And the valleys can go down to like 40 mgdl, which is also really, really bad. And so type 1 diabetics who don't understand how to manage their mind around this roller coaster end up on an emotional roller coaster that's kind of tied to those highs and lows. So when we
Okay.
have the negative experience of the low low or the high high, that's that, like, they're blaming the blood sugars for how they feel. And then when they're in range, like between the lines, if you're on a CGM, you have a high line and a low line. If you're between the lines, people will characterize that as, oh, I'm having a positive emotion because I'm between these lines. But
Mm.
that's like, we can talk about this a little bit later, that that's not actually what controls your emotions about type 1 diabetes. But when I talk to people, they characterize their emotions around what their blood sugars are doing. And I did that in the past before
Mm.
I figured out how to not do that. So I can definitely talk about that too. For
Mhm.
reference point, like a perfect blood sugar is around 83. And
Oh,
when,
oh.
yes. So I was actually diagnosed with my blood sugar being 544, and I was 2 years old.
Oh my goodness. You're a miracle.
I have met people who have been diagnosed over 1,000. That's when your organs start shutting down, is over 1,000 mg/dL. And
Oh
I've
my
met people who have
God.
been diagnosed at 18 months, 10 months, all the way up into adulthood. And that's actually what we're going to talk about a little bit later, is diagnosis in adulthood. But the emotional roller coaster is feeling like our emotions are tied to what our blood sugars are doing. So if
Okay.
we're above the line or below the line, that means we feel bad. But if we're in between the lines, then that means we feel good. But that's
Mm.
not technically how it works. That's not how emotions work. And so I was on this emotional roller coaster before I figured out that what my blood sugars are doing actually have nothing to do with how I feel emotionally.
You said you've met people at even 18 months being
Yep.
diagnosed with, but I don't understand. I literally, I don't understand. Like, I mean, you could, if you're watching the video version, I apologize for the look on my face, which is just one of complete astonishment. Just because I'm like, but I thought, this is my thinking, and probably many of you, of the viewers and listeners right now may be thinking the same thing, but I thought that diabetes comes from like maybe an overconsumption of insulin or of sugar and different things like that. But obviously, if someone is 18 months, they
Yeah.
haven't.
So that belief that it comes from overeating is actually tied to type 2. And that's again why most people, when you think of diabetes, you think type 2, because that's the one where you're eating too much, you're overweight, you're not using insulin correctly. That's all type 2. Type
Oh.
1, because it's autoimmune, they don't actually know what one of the many causes are. There's potential for so many different causes, but one of them
My
is
goodness.
they've identified a couple genes that have to do with being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but also they've
Okay.
identified that there are a lot of environmental factors that can trigger this
Wow.
predisposition to type 1 diabetes. So even if you've never had another type 1 in your family, and most of the people that I talk to on my podcast don't have other people with type 1 in their family, they are the first. I am the first in my
Wow.
family. But I do have history of autoimmune on my dad's side. So that's kind of makes sense now that I have type 1. But when you don't have that kind of history in your family, it kind of comes out of nowhere. And so you don't really understand why you're getting it. But
Mm-hmm.
because it's it can be tied to genetics, it can be tied to environment. We've actually seen a lot of cases that are diagnosed in the fall and the winter months. And that's with the changing of the seasons. Things are getting colder. You're going back inside a lot more. We've also seen it present, like the symptoms of diabetes can be mistaken for flu symptoms. And so when you go to the doctor with flu symptoms, you might not actually have the flu. You might have type 1 diabetes. And so it's one of the things that I talk about a lot is make sure you get tested, get a blood test. Ask the doctor to test your blood for blood sugar to see, are you high? Because if you are, then that's a signal that you might want to get an actual lab done to find out if your C-peptides are down and to find out if you actually have type 1 diabetes. She's just sitting there shocked.
I am, because you mentioned that a lot of the, especially a lot of the people that you've interviewed and you yourself, like you are the first person in your family, in your family's history to get it. And it just honestly, like for me, I just went off into this like trail of thinking like what other autoimmune diseases, in my family line may have existed that could trigger something like that. I mean, is that even a valid question to ask, or is it like, oh no, it doesn't work like that?
We don't know. The
My
friend that I have
gosh.
who was diagnosed at 18 months, she also has celiac, but that didn't present until she was 12 years old. I have family members with autoimmune of like lupus, fibromyalgia. There's an autoimmune reproductive disorder. It just runs the gamut. And I just happened to
Oh my
get type 1
God.
diabetes. And there's also PCOS in my family, which is fun. I don't have that, thank God. But
Yeah.
the other thing is that autoimmunes like to play together. So when you have one, you are at risk of developing another, which is why we also see an increased number of type 1 diabetics who also have celiac. So then you're dealing with all of these things on top of all of the rest of your life.
Okay.
It gets worse.
How worse?
So half of all diagnoses right now are actually in adults. And the rate of diagnosis has been going up over the past couple decades, but specifically within the last few years. And that's because
COVID.
type 1 diabetes is listed as one of the 1,294 possible side effects of the COVID vaccine. 65% of the world population got at least one dose. And I think there are like 530 million entrepreneurs in the world. Do the math. How many entrepreneurs got the vaccine who are unprepared with the possibility of developing a condition they know nothing about?
Okay. Okay. First of all, I just got the last vaccine shot.
Sorry. This stuff is not being
it's
published.
a requirement. It's a requirement. It's a requirement for me because I'm leaving China. So it's a requirement for me to do that in order to even enter into the country I'm going to, or else I wouldn't have done it because I've already had COVID. I had COVID twice. So it was just like, I mean, what? I have antibodies already. Why are you giving me additional? But it's okay, whatever. So if it is developed in, an entrepreneur, and they're already functioning in their job, their business, or maybe they have both, like you and I both do. We both have jobs and businesses. What if it happens to them? What if they develop type 1 diabetes and they don't know what to do with, they don't know how to function or how to continue on with their job? Like, how would you coach them or lead them, in saying, well, it's happened to me. It's been my story much longer than yours. And I've been doing XYZ. How would you coach them?
So first off, I would validate the experience, because when you get type 1 diabetes, especially as an adult, you are leaving what you knew behind. It is a completely
Wow.
new normal. And so there's a grieving
Wow.
process that you have to go through, because you are losing that part of yourself that you knew for however long you lived before you got type 1 diabetes. And so there
Yeah.
is that grief process that you have to go through. And I will always encourage people to feel those feelings. Don't push it away. Don't try to get rid of them. Don't try to buffer against them. So we have to go through that grieving process. And then the second thing
Wow.
that I would start with is helping them understand that, like all of the other circumstances in their life, like their business, where they grew up, like how much they weigh, type 1 diabetes is a circumstance. It's something, it's a diagnosis. You cannot change it. You cannot cure it. You cannot go back to fix it. It's a circumstance. And so from there, then we get to choose how we want to think about it. And if we think that it's going to be a problem, that it sucks, that I shouldn't have gotten this, that like something is wrong with the world, then that's going to be your experience of it. But I teach my clients through this idea that diabetes is a circumstance, that you can live a life that's possibly even better than your life before with type 1 diabetes.
Having this information, a lot of people could say, oh, well, you guys are just talking doom and gloom. You're thinking so negatively. Honey, I would rather know
Yes.
and not be, not let it be something that is, that directly impacts me, because it could be somebody that maybe it could be an employee later, or a virtual assistant, or maybe it could be a team member, a colleague, or
Yes.
whoever. You just never know. So knowing the information is great, but I would rather know and it not be something that, applies to me, than to not know. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on.
Right.
I'm like, what's going on with my body? Am I dying? Or how can
Yep.
I continue to live? How can I even run a business with this? Like, or am I just gonna have to sit at home all day? Like, am I, so I'm glad that I have you here, because I know that you are helping us a lot. And so you were talking about, I apologize. I had to just go in and say that, because you start thinking about things like, say if you have like for me, I do have my thyroid is not as stable Okay. My thyroid health is not as stable as it could be. And I believe back in maybe 2015, 2016, where I don't know if you want to call it a soft diagnosis. It wasn't like a hard diagnosis, but it was a soft diagnosis of hypothyroidism because I wouldn't let them, cut on me to get the biopsy. I'm like, there's got to be another way. Like can't you just stick something down my throat and do whatever you got to do? I mean, you trying to cut my neck. Like, I'm not really here for that because
No.
I'm not. Yeah, they wanted to cut my neck. Like, they were like, no, we're just going to do a small incision. No, you're not. No, you are not. Just a small incision. No, because at first when they said they were going to do a biopsy, I'm thinking it's a needle, so I'm all prepared. Like, okay, they're just going to stick a needle in there, pull it out, and they have a little tissue or whatever they need. No, they talking about slicing and dicing on my throat. No, thank you.
No.
I'll pass. I'll go to Dr. Google and find out all the foods that I need to eat for a healthy thyroid, and I will just let that thing at some point in time. But so when you did say, that and one autoimmune disease likes to play with another, it did kind of take me into thinking, and of course, we're not trying to be negative. We're not trying to preach doom and gloom and tell everybody. We're not doing that. But again, it is good to be knowledgeable. And Colleen, you have so much knowledge about this. I mean, you're busting out statistics that are covered up. Statistics and data and information that's covered up from public knowledge. And so I appreciate this. I do. I appreciate this very much. And so what about a person who, I'm going to take it back into what you were talking about, because you were talking about being able to, I guess, managing your mind, like the topic says, managing your mind, your mindset about type 1 diabetes so that you can better manage your business. So, someone who has, or maybe who gets type 1 diabetes as an adult and they're freaking out. They're like, I'm not going to be able to work my business, or I'm not going to be able to do this, do that. You were sharing some of the tips of like how you would coach them and yeah. So I'm sorry. I know I butt in for that, but go ahead, please. I'm sorry. You may continue.
Yeah. So first off, it's talking about that grief process to actually deal with the grief of losing a part of you from before your diagnosis. And that's totally acceptable. That's expected. I would not try to tell somebody that you shouldn't be feeling grief because of this. And then it's going into the idea that diabetes is a circumstance, like everything else in your life. You have this thing now. So now what? Because you can't change it. How do you want to move forward with it? Instead of fighting against it, feeling resistance and resentment for having this thing that you didn't ask for. I mean, I didn't ask for this, and I was diagnosed at age 2. So when you go to this place of acceptance and understanding that, while you didn't do anything to get this, and this is now something you have to deal with, how do you want to show up? And those are the same things that you can take into your business. Every single thing that happens, every circumstance, every client you sign, every no that you get, every fail that you have, all the tech glitches that we've been having today, all of those are circumstances. So because of that, because it's a circumstance, it's completely neutral, it happened. How do you want to think about it? How do you want to go forward knowing what you know now? How do you want to go forward with the things that you've learned? Because there are no, I mean, there you can call it a failure if you want, but there's lessons and there's wins. So everything that you learn can be a lesson. Take that lesson forward. What worked, what didn't, what are you going to do differently now that you have this thing? And I'm not trying to scare people. I'm not trying to fearmonger about this. I want to provide awareness around this thing, because if people are experiencing the symptoms of type 1 diabetes, but they have no idea, maybe it feels like flu, maybe it feels like COVID. If you're very thirsty, if you're losing weight a lot, if you're feeling really hungry, if you're fatigued, if you're lethargic, if you get blurry vision, these are all the classic symptoms of type 1 diabetes. If you feel any of those, go to your doctor, get tested, because you want to know early on if you have it or not, because the earlier you catch it, the more protected your pancreas will be. And that's a whole nother medical conversation right there.
Yeah. So what's the most, what would you say is the fundamental truth about type 1 diabetes that most people don't know? I mean, obviously there's a whole lot that you've already shared with us that we did not know. Okay. We just did not know. But what would you say is, is the fundamental truth that most people just don't know?
It's a circumstance. And
Mm.
I have proof from my own life that all of the
Mhm.
circumstances of diabetes don't control my emotions. So
Okay.
I've been diagnosed since I was 2 years old. This year will be 27 years with type 1 diabetes.
Wow.
In 2016, I reached my highest weight. And I believed up until then that it was impossible to lose weight with type 1 diabetes. That's just what my doctors kind of inferred, if not, they didn't like directly tell me. But that's the message that I got from them, was I would never be able to lose weight as a type 1 diabetic. And I lost over 60 pounds between 2016 and today. And I normalized my A1C. I got it below 5.7%. I've decreased my insulin intake by over half. But none of those
Wow.
changes in the diabetes circumstances changed how I felt about it. I was still riding that emotional roller coaster because I would still have those highs and I would still have those lows. They might be a
Mm.
smaller margin, but I would
Yeah.
think there was something wrong because I went high or because I went low. I did something
Wow.
wrong. There's something wrong with me. I can't handle this. I can't control this. I thought I had this under control. That's a big thought, that if people are on the emotional roller coaster and they're in
Yeah.
between the lines for a while, if they're thinking, I should be in control, I thought I had this under control, when they go outside of
Yeah.
those lines, that's a huge indicator that you are not treating diabetes like a circumstance.
It's just a circumstance. And it should be treated as one. It's not the end of the world. It's not the thing that will come in and destroy your life if you treat it as a circumstance. One thing that you said accept it, have that acceptance. And Colleen, do you find that there are people who are really reluctant to accepting it because if they do, it's like they're saying something is really wrong with me?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people mistake the use of the word acceptance with the word condone. Like, because I
Mm.
accept this, it should have
Ooh.
happened.
Woo.
But that's not true. When you accept
Wow.
something, you're accepting it, that it happened, that it's occurred, you cannot change it. It's reality. If you're
Wow.
trying to fight against it, that's you're resisting reality. And Byron Katie says that you can fight with reality, you'll just lose 100% of the time.
Yeah.
But but when people equate acceptance with condoning, you're not using the right words, and so you're just setting yourself up to feel more pain and more suffering, because thinking that you accept diabetes means that you're condoning that you have it. I think I broke her.
Acceptance does not mean condoning. Oh my gosh, woman. Because, and I ask that because depending on the subculture that you come from, you do not claim an illness. You do not claim that you have, that something's really wrong with you. You don't claim those things because when you do, it becomes a part of you.
Mm-hmm.
When you decide to accept it, it's like it's really real. Like, there's really this issue that's happening. And I love what you said a while ago when you talked about allow yourself to grieve. That was one of the things that I had to learn just in general, and of course, this segment is talking about managing your mind, with, in regards to type 1 diabetes, which can help you to manage your business. There are so many things that can happen, like you already said, as a circumstance in your business, to where if you don't have that mindset of acceptance, like, oh, okay, it happened, I accept it, now I need to figure out how to move forward, but if you start to freak out, like most of us do, you start to freak out and be like, no, or you go into denial, it makes it worse. But acceptance is not condone. It's like, I don't know that it just hit me a little differently when you said that, because even, and I just mentioned about the thyroid. It wasn't until like a few years ago when I finally said, no, Charity, sweetheart, you have a lump, it's a goiter, thankfully. And I did go get it checked out, and it's like, it's non-cancerous, thankfully, nothing, it's there. but you can't just walk around with a lump in your throat and say nothing's wrong.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily saying that, something bad is happening or going on in there, but it is not normal. I mean, look at your throat.
Oh, the other thing that I want to like add on to this is that when diabetes is a circumstance, you can still choose to have thoughts that generate negative emotion. You can choose to
Ooh, it's
think
a
that
choice.
it's a choice. You can choose to think that you don't want this, this shouldn't have happened. Those are all choices. So you can accept it, but still think that something has gone wrong. That's
Okay.
okay. There's nothing
Okay.
wrong with thinking that, because
Okay.
there's like this concept that life is 50-50. We're going to have 50% positive experience overall and 50% negative. And if
Mhm.
diabetes is just part of the overall, then you don't have to worry about like, is it one or the other? You can choose
Okay.
to have a positive experience about type 1 diabetes, or you can choose to have a negative one. So even 27 years in, even having done this work on myself, I will still choose to feel upset when my insulin pump yells at me for like the 5th time because I'm low. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like I've learned how to like come to terms with that these are all generated by my thoughts. It's not generated by the insulin pump yelling at me. It's not generated by what my blood sugar is. It's all in how I choose to think about it. And you can choose to think things that generate negative emotion. That is totally fine.
And allow yourself to feel those emotions.
Yes.
Because when you
Yes.
don't and you keep them bottled up, I feel like that actually causes more illness, more
Yeah.
health issues and things when you keep stuff bottled up and stress and everything. So, wow. So, how long have you been helping women with type 1 diabetes manage their minds and manage their businesses?
I have been the advice friend since I was a kid, and it didn't really even occur to me that coaching was a thing until I figured out about the Life Coach School podcast in 2018. I binged
Okay.
that, and then in 2020 is when I officially started coaching people. So since 2020,
Wow.
I've been helping all sorts of people figure out how to manage their minds around like not just type 1 diabetes, but writing books, just like relationships. It kind of just started with like a general life coaching thing. And then I
Okay.
niched down to market specifically to type 1 diabetics at the end of last year. So even though I've been
Okay.
helping tons of people through my podcast and just through talking to people in general, like I'm the advice friend. So I've been
Yeah.
doing it. I want to say I've been doing it all my life.
That's awesome. I mean, and I love that you are so knowledgeable. Colleen, I mean, you have given us so much information in just this one episode that really had my face. I know my face. Y'all excuse my face again, my facial expressions. I know they were all over the place because I was really like, what? Say that again? Are you kidding me? And I so appreciate that. I do, because you're bringing an awareness. You're bringing an awareness, and that's golden to me. That's golden.
Thank you.
So before we do, I guess, segue out of this episode today, well, I have two things. Is there anything else that you want to share with us about managing your mind so that you can, I guess, better manage your business? Is there anything you want to share with us before I ask our final question?
It just goes back to knowing that type 1 diabetes is not a problem. Like any other circumstance, if it's factual, if it's happened, if it's in the past, if it's something somebody said, a diagnosis, it's neutral. It's a circumstance, and then you get to choose how you want to think and feel about it.
I love it. Oh my goodness. Okay, here's the finale question that I always ask everyone that comes to the Leaders Lab. What is the one characteristic that you believe every leader must have?
I think everyone should have the ability to generate a working environment or any other environment in their lives that instills this sense of psychological safety. So we touched on that a little bit earlier, but we didn't actually define it.
Okay.
Psychological safety is this idea that you won't be punished or ridiculed or treated negatively for speaking up. And the
Mm,
easiest way to kind of get this across is actually in terms of real life safety. So, like physical safety. And so I
okay.
used to work in the power industry. And the easiest way to explain this is if you're on like a construction site or if you're at like a power plant, if you see something unsafe going on, if it's going against procedure, it looks off, but you fear that reaction of the people in charge if you bring it up, then you are not
Mm.
psychologically safe. So if
Oh,
you're in
wow.
that space, you are more likely to actually jeopardize your physical safety because you're
Mm,
conditioned to fear an emotional reaction. So when I
Okay.
was at that job, my manager was very, very good at generating psychological safety. I felt very safe when I was working for
Okay.
him. And
Okay.
I actually called him the linchpin of psychological safety. And I've done several presentations on it for that job. But
Wow.
like, even if you're not in corporate or field work or anything like that, this is still a really important skill, because the more psychologically safe that people are, the more authentic they are, and the better relationships that you have because of it. So especially in terms of like type 1 diabetes, if you feel psychologically safe to talk about it with your doctors, with your spouse, with your friends, then you're less likely to feel so alone. You're less likely to feel that emotional roller coaster, because you have that community around you that can support you, because you're safe to speak up about it.
I love it. I appreciate that so much. You quickly just brought in another dynamic and saying, hey, make sure you take care of your psychological well-being. Like if you're feeling like, you're not safe, I feel like that's supposed to be a whole nother segment. Because now you're talking about safe spaces. I feel like you're talking about safe spaces, physical and psychological safe spaces. And we don't have time to go into that today. But so I guess that just means that you're gonna have to come back for season 3. I mean,
Sweet.
I'm
I'm
just
down.
saying, because I'm just saying, like, you're gonna have to come back for season 3 because 2 years ago, nah, 3 years ago, definitely in 2019, I was just in a place to where my mind was all over the place because I had a lot going on. But then also too, I think like most of us, occasionally we seek the approval of others.
Yes.
And my mindset was just, I felt like it was very unhealthy, and it took me some time to go from wanting to seek that approval and basically like being a partial yes woman, because I still know how to say no. Okay, I still know how to say no, but being a partial yes woman to really just saying, look, above all, I need to protect my peace. I got to protect my peace, and that means shutting some things out, cutting some people off, removing myself from situations, from people, places, and things that were just disturbing my peace. And also, I didn't feel like, like you were talking about, I didn't feel emotionally secure in quite a few of these situations. So it's been a journey. It has been a journey. And so even now, like with my motivational Mondays, I've been talking a lot, maybe over the past 18 to 20 months, about your mental health and about self-care and about, being authentic. So, we're gonna have to come and let you have be a part of the series so you could talk about psychological safety. Cause I mean, I'm here for
Oh, I
that.
would love to. I have so much material on psychological safety. It's nuts.
Well, then you heard it, Entreleader. She's going to be back with us for season 3, which will be in 2023. I'm so excited about that. Like, I love that. She's going to be with us. And I am, again, I'm just so happy that you were able to be with us today. And if you are listening to the audio version of the podcast and you're not seeing her details up on the screen, you can check the show notes. Okay, the podcast show notes. It will have all the links and all the ways for you to contact her. Even it will have her her bio where you can connect as well. And of course, if you're watching the video version, you can check the description box below. But Colleen, can you just verbally tell our listeners how can they connect with you on social media?
Yeah, the best way is actually on Instagram. My handle is at inspired forward. And that's where I spend the most time on social media, is on Instagram.
Okay. All right. And you also have do you prefer for people to visit your website or to just see your content on social media?
Yeah, they can go to my website too. That's inspiredforward.com. So I'm pretty much inspired forward about everywhere.
Okay.
So that's pretty much the best way to find me, is if you search Inspired Forward, you'll find me somewhere.
I love it so much. Well, listen, Colleen, thank you so much for joining us in the Leaders Lab on today. I so appreciate you and your experiences. And I look forward to having you in season 3. I'm so serious about that.
I'm looking forward to coming back. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, Entreleaders, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. More so, I hope that you extracted a lot of data and information. I mean, she came armed and ready today to share things that I never knew, never thought to ask about. And I'm sure that some of you feel the exact same way. And so if one of your biggest takeaways, I want to know what they are. If you're watching on YouTube, drop it down in the comments. Let me know, what's your biggest takeaway? Also, if you're willing to give testimonials about how you yourself may be dealing with type 1 diabetes, or anything, you can comment on the podcast, comment on social media. Also, if you want to send yours in, you could also, here it is on the screen, the Leaders Lab podcast at DrCharityTV.com. You can also send in testimonials, whatever it is. We want to hear from you. I would definitely be sharing the information or your feedback and your comments with Colleen as they come in. Whew. Y'all, it's been a big day. It's been a long week and a big day, and I hope that you all are mentally recovering and just relaxing as much as possible. Whether you're at work, at the office, whether you're on vacation or whatever it is, please make sure you take care of your mental health. I love that, she talked about managing your mind, with whatever. She said it wasn't, not just for type 1 diabetics, but managing your mind, managing those expectations, right? So that you can better manage your business. And so I'm so grateful that she was with us today. And I'm also grateful that you continue to tune in every single week to the Leaders Lab podcast. It humbles me to know that you tune in to learn from me and my special guests. And I really do hope that you found our content valuable and that it has helped you in your journey to becoming a better Entreleader. Don't forget, you can connect with me everywhere on social media at DrCharityTV. And I look forward to seeing you next week in the lab.
Thank you for listening to the Leaders Lab podcast. Visit our website at www.drcharitytv.com.